Visions Art Museum welcomes you to its first exhibitions of 2021. 3 exhibitions addressing issues impacting our oceans today. Shifting Tides, tackling the current state of the Pacific Ocean, lines the walls of all 3 galleries. Interspersed alongside is Beth Blankenship's Connecting Threads, shining a light on ocean health and marine life. In addition, offered exclusively online, is Sandra Meach's Polar Expressions, responding to the impact of climate change on our polar regions. Her works observe the increasing rate of melting in these areas. Her Polar Meltdown series was inspired by travels in Iceland. The artist's paper images were collaged together and heat transferred to cotton. Photographs and sketchbook explorations are always Meach's starting point. Imagery, after transfer to cloth, is dyed, painted, and ultimately machine or hand-stitched. Her Meltdown series, for example, uses orange and red threads and copper shim to reflect the effects of climate change on melting ice. Lost and Found reveals what is discovered as glaciers and ice sheets melt to uncover everything from alpine rubbish to fossils and petrified trees. While celebrating the beauty and power of these walls and rivers of ice, she points to their fragile nature in the face of climate change. As we enter the galleries, we are met immediately by Alice Beasley's In My Wake, a stirring piece inciting an immediate response. There is no mystery as to the subject matter we will discover here. The seemingly limitless bounty that is our Pacific Ocean is under threat. While we repose to soak in a golden sunset over sparkling waters, as in Carolyn Villar's Low Tide at La Jolla, marine life and human communities face the effects of overfishing, global warming, pollution, and destruction of coastal habitats. We find that this vital slice of life is in peril. Shifting Tides features artwork by members of the Studio Art Quilt Associates' 7 Pacific-facing regions, reaching from Alaska down the arc of the coast to the Hawaiian archipelago. The collection of 46 works was assembled by juror Ann Johnston, whose included work, Wave 15, addresses the impending irreversibility of changes to our oceans, as she interprets the sensation of a wave in hot and angry reds. Shifting Tides focuses on the current state of the Pacific Ocean, whose life-sustaining waters are threatened by human activities. The artists explore a range of stylistic approaches and address a variety of issues affecting these waters and their communities that rely on them. Some appreciate the beauty that exists, while others see the brewing trouble, addressing questions to ponder and actions to undertake. The very coastline of the Pacific itself is threatened, slowly being reshaped. June Yeager writes of her piece, Tropical Metamorphism, the mixed ecosystem of sea and land is essential to life. The sediments deposited into the ocean from our rivers help to curb the ocean erosion, creating breakwater, thus protecting the shoreline. Her work represents a topical map, zeroed in on the river's delta as it meets the ocean. Bonnie Bucknam shows us the beauty of shorebirds along the coast, juxtaposed by oil derricks, another visualization of our effect on the Pacific coastline. In a cry echoed around the world, Kat Larea bemoans the receding glaciers, shrinking their rivers of ice to reveal new vegetation. Another result of climate change, rising sea levels. Nancy Bardish's Rising Tides addresses the threat in a clashing patchwork of blues and reds. The humor of Kathy Marinker's alarmist version of these consequences in Whither the Waterfront is quickly chastened by the impending reality of waterfront structures soon to become submerged along the shoreline. In addition to the ravages of climate change, we are menaced by the fallout of pollution. Judith Quinn Garnett addresses research forecasting that by 2050 plastics will outnumber fish in the North Pacific in her abstract representation of a building mound. This accumulation of floating trash in the North Pacific off the western coast of the U.S. is echoed by another nearer to Japan, connected by a convergence zone and referred to collectively as the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. Here, as in Lisa Jenny's Rings of Eternity, you find, among other debris, discarded fishing nets, plastic bags, and these plastic rings. The artist challenges consumers, manufacturers, and governments to find a new path. The garbage patch is unfortunately not unique. Others found in the South Pacific, North and South Atlantic, and Indian Oceans. Jackie Manley offers a visual of the gyre forming itself. Her piece, Widening Gyre Flotsam, depicts an estimated 80,000 tons of plastic on their journey from the hands of consumers to a final resting place in the Pacific Ocean. Nancy Ryan provided an impasto-like abstraction in blues and browns to recreate these, quote, floating junkyards on the high seas in her piece simply titled Water. In addition to adulterating our pristine waters, the effect of this pollution on marine life is especially devastating. Diana Bartling shows us a turtle tangled in a net in Help Me. Turtles, birds, and fish can become entangled and stuck in plastic debris. Another concerning repercussion is the plastics making their way into our food chain. While plastics eventually break down into smaller pieces, they are not biodegradable. Shellfish and other marine life consume these microplastics, which are in turn consumed by us. Janet Scruggs offers us plastic chowder. Marine animals and birds can consume these plastics, filling their bellies with undigestible content and ultimately starving. Also affected are ocean flora, such as giant kelp forests. Libby Williamson depicts these delicately balanced ecosystems in Ripples Untended, struggling to resist change via tea bags and zippers. Carla Stair in Diatom 8 brings us the stunning patterns of single-celled aquatic plants called diatoms. While these microscopic algae absorb carbon dioxide and produce oxygen, climate change and ocean acidification threaten the balance that allows them to carry out this important work. Her piece is a reminder of the importance of even the tiniest, unseen organisms. The effects move up the food chain to the fish that we rely on for both food and industry. Changing temperatures have affected wild salmon runs. The salmon seen in river deltas like this in Nan Thompson's Copper River Flats are becoming smaller and smaller, signaling a crisis for the species and the fishing industry. Rising water temperature, pesticide runoff, radiation, oil pollution, silting, and overfishing are together generating a grim future for fishermen. Cheryl LeBlanc uses the moldering fishing vessel Pacifica to symbolize this diminishing industry. In the Marshall Islands exists a dangerously radioactive dome filled with nuclear waste and solid chunks of plutonium, remnants of the United States atomic testing in the 40s and 50s. In addition to thousands of tons of trash polluting our ocean's waters, rising sea levels and increasingly destructive storms threaten to unleash this horror, represented in Louise Hall's Atomic Atoll. While the terrors of climate change and pollution intensify, we mourn the loss of beauty which we once took for granted. Bonnie Smith offers such a sentiment in her work, Moss Beach, a perfect view of nature's wonder, left now mostly in memory. Kathleen McCabe brings us, quote, the sound of crashing waves, the smell of fresh, clean air, and the calm of the vast horizon in a quiet moment. A couple sits, appreciating the beauty that the Pacific can offer, reason to save it, and hope that it's not too late. Sprinkled throughout the galleries are Beth Blankenship's thread vessels of her exhibition Connecting Threads. Her sculptural works of interconnected threads speak to the unpredictability and vulnerability of our world. Each thread cannot stand alone, but linked together forms something magnificent. Her vessels are stitched onto water-soluble fiber, which, after stitching is complete, is dissolved away to reveal the connected threads. Like these threads, humankind is connected to the oceans which we admire and destroy, and the ecosystems of the oceans are connected as well. Represented in her work, Toxic Algae. The massive algae bloom in 2015, which killed whales, seals, seabirds, and fish, was caused by warmer ocean waters favoring their growth. Similarly, rising ocean temperatures are causing a boom in octopi populations and a crash in crab populations, rewriting the balance in the oceans. This piece is titled simply Octopus and Crab. Ghost Gear echoes sentiments in works like Bartling's Help Me and Lisa Jenny's Rings of Eternity, representing lost and abandoned fishing gear, left to float in our oceans before becoming entangled with and killing marine life. We will end with Beth Blankenship's Tide Pools series. 4 miniature microcosms of marine beauty. Tide pools take me back to childhood, writes the artist. Her solidly standing vessels made of insignificant threads bring us the fascination of a child peering into a pool of water, observing the creatures found within, vulnerable and connected to us all. We hope to welcome you soon to enjoy the experience in person. Thank you.